The night the forest caught fire, Mara did not run toward the river. She did not run toward the village. She did not even run toward the mountain road, where the last travelers were already fleeing through the smoke. She ran deeper into the flames, because beneath her little cabin, 9 starving wolf pups were crying in the dark. By the time she carried the last one into her cellar, smoke had filled the rooms above her. The roof was beginning to burn, and every path out of the valley was blocked by fire. Mara knew she might not survive the night, but she had no idea that one of those tiny lives belonged to the bloodline of the Alpha King, and she certainly did not know that before sunrise, the most feared wolf in the northern kingdom would stand outside her ruined home, following a trail of smoke, ash, blood, and tiny pawprints to the woman who had saved what his enemies wanted destroyed, at the farthest edge of Valerian, where the last stone walls of the villages gave way to fields, and the fields disappeared beneath ancient pines. There stood a little wooden cabin. It belonged to Mara. The cabin was not much to look at. Its roof leaned slightly toward the east. One shutter had been repaired so many times that it was more patch than wood. A narrow chimney rose from the roof, and when winter winds came down from the northern mountains, smoke sometimes blew back into the room instead of rising into the sky. But Mara loved it. She had learned to love small things: a warm cup beside a cold window, a dry blanket after a storm, fresh bread when flour was scarce, the sound of rain tapping against the roof while a kettle whispered over the fire. She had no husband, no children, and no family waiting for her in the village. The winter fever had taken them years ago. Mara had survived because she had been the one tending everyone else. Afterward, she had discovered that grief did not always leave loudly. Sometimes it simply became part of the furniture. It sat beside you while you eat. It followed you into bed. It waited quietly while you worked. Mara worked. She gathered herbs from the forest. She dried roots above the fireplace. She repaired torn coats for the villagers. She treated injured animals when hunters brought them to her. And whenever winter became cruel, she left small pieces of food near the edge of the woods. She never told anyone. She did not need praise. If a fox found the food, that was enough. If a starving bird survived another night, that was enough. If an old farmer could walk again because Mara had mixed the right herbs into his tea, that was enough. The villagers sometimes called her strange. Mara never argued with them. She had learned long ago that kindness did not need permission. That afternoon, the sky had turned the pale gray of old silver. Cold wind moved through the blackpine forest, shaking the highest branches. Mara pulled her wool cloak tighter around her shoulders and bent over a patch of winterroot. She had nearly filled her basket when she heard something scratch, scratch, then silence. Mara froze. The forest seemed to freeze with her. She slowly lifted her head. There it was again. Scratch. A faint sound beneath the earth. Mara set down her basket. She listened. Nothing. Then came a tiny whimper. Her expression changed. She stepped between the trees. The sound came again. This time there were 2 cries, then 3. Mara pushed through a curtain of low branches until she found an enormous fallen pine. Its roots lifted from the ground like the fingers of some buried giant. Beneath those roots was a narrow opening. She knelt. The smell reached her first. Blood, wet earth, and something warm and animal-like. Mara lowered herself until she could see into the darkness. 2 pale eyes looked back at her. Then another pair, then another. Her breath caught. There were wolves. Puppies. 9 of them. They were pressed together so tightly that they looked like one trembling mass of fur. They were much too young to be alone. Their eyes were barely open. Their bodies were thin beneath dirty fur, and every rib seemed visible. 1 pup tried to crawl toward her. Its legs gave way. Mara's heart tightened. Oh, little one. She reached inside. The smallest pup was nearly white. Not the soft gray white of an ordinary winter wolf, but a strange pale silver that seemed to catch even the weak afternoon light. Mara touched it gently. The pup flinched. She immediately pulled her hand away. I won't hurt you. The words were barely louder than a breath. The pup stared at her. Then it crawled forward again. This time, it placed its tiny nose against her fingers. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. There were wounds along its side. Not bite wounds, cuts. Thin, straight marks, metal. Her eyes moved to the others. One had a cut across its hind leg. Another had a swollen paw. A third carried a dark ring around its ankle, where something had been tied too tightly. Mara's face hardened. These pups had not simply been abandoned. Someone had hunted them. She looked into the forest. "Where is your mother?" Only wind answered. Mara searched for tracks. She found them beneath the pine, large wolf prints, then blood, a lot of it. The tracks continued toward the mountains. None returned. Mara followed them for perhaps 50 yards before stopping. The blood became heavier. Then the trail vanished beneath a patch of disturbed earth. She stood there for a long moment. She already knew. The mother was not coming back. The temperature dropped as the afternoon faded. Mara looked toward the hollow .9 pups. And oh mother, and oh shelter, and oh food, and winter coming. She knew what the sensible choice was. Leave them. Nature would decide. But Mara had never been very good at accepting that sentence. She returned to the den. The smallest white pup was shivering. Mara removed her cloak. She wrapped the weakest pups first. Then she lifted the others carefully into a woven basket. It took 3 trips on the first. She carried 4 on the second, 3 on the third. She returned for the last 2. Each time she came back, the pups cried. Until they smelled her again. By sunset, all 9 were beneath her cabin. Mara's cellar was small, but it was warm. She spread old blankets across the floor. She warmed milk over a small iron stove and diluted it carefully with water. The first pup barely swallowed. The second pushed the milk away. Mara waited. She tried again slowly, patiently. One by one, the pups began drinking. Mara sat on the stone floor with her back against the wall. The fire above her crackled. The wind moved outside. 9 tiny bodies breathed against the blankets. For the first time that day, Mara allowed herself to smile. That's better. The white pup crawled toward her. It placed one paw against her knee. Mara looked down. Something about that pup made her uneasy. Not because it was frightening, because it was different. She carefully parted the fur beneath its neck. There was a thin dark leather band around it. A tiny symbol had been carved into the leather. Mara stared. She knew that symbol. She had seen it once on the northern fortress gates, a crescent moon surrounded by 3 claw marks. The mark of the Moonfang line, the royal wolves. Mara sat perfectly still. No. She touched the symbol again. Old stories returned to her. Stories her grandmother used to tell when winter nights became too long. Stories of the first Alpha Kings. Stories of wolves that could recognize royal blood. Stories of a hidden line that had guarded the northern mountains for centuries. Mara had always thought they were legends. Now a starving white pup was sleeping against her knee with the same mark around its neck. She looked at the other 8. Silver markings, unusual eyes, royal symbols. Suddenly the cellar felt much smaller. Someone had not merely hunted 9 wolf pups. Someone had hunted the future of the northern kingdom. Mara rose. She climbed the stairs. The evening sky had turned almost black. Then she heard it, a horn far away. Another answered. Mara opened the cabin door. Smoke was rising beyond the ridge. First it was a thin gray line. Then another column appeared. Then another. Her face went pale. The forest was burning. Not in one place, and several. Fire moved between the trees like orange fingers. Mara stepped outside. The wind changed. Flames appeared along the northern ridge, then the eastern slope, then the western road. Her eyes widened. This isn't a forest fire. She turned toward the cabin, the pups. She ran. She slammed the door behind her and descended the cellar stairs. The puppies had begun crying. Mara gathered them close. Above her, something cracked. A burning beam fell. The entire cabin shook. Smoke poured through the ceiling. Mara wrapped the white pup against her chest. Then she heard footsteps, not animals, men. They were outside. Boots crossed the ground. Someone kicked through the front door. Mara held her breath. A man's voice came through the smoke. Search the cabin. Another answered. Nothing upstairs. Mara's heart hammered. The pups suddenly went silent. Every tiny body became rigid. They knew those voices. Mara looked toward the cellar door. The footsteps moved closer. Then a boot struck the wooden door once, twice. The hinges groaned. Mara pulled all 9 pups against her. The fire above them roared. The men outside were searching for something, and suddenly Mara understood. The fire had never been meant to destroy the forest. It had been meant to flush something out, something that had been hiding. Beneath her floor, another blow struck the cellar door. Mara's fingers closed around the white pup. Then she remembered the old drainage tunnel beneath the cellar wall, and she knew there was only one way out. Down, the cellar had never felt so small. Smoke slipped through the cracks around the wooden door. The pups whimpered softly. Mara could hear the men above them, furniture breaking, floorboards cracking, boots moving from room to room. Then silence. She knew that silenced it was the silence of someone. Listening, Mara looked toward the old stone wall, the drainage tunnel. She had not thought about it in years. Her grandfather had once told her that the cellar had been part of a larger underground system built during an old border war. The tunnel led toward the hillside. If it was still open, it might save them. If it had collapsed, Mara did not finish the thought. She placed the white pup inside a wool-lined sack, then another. Then another. The larger pups were strong enough to crawl. The smallest were not. She lifted the first one against her chest. The stone wall was hot. Above them, something exploded. The ceiling shook. Dust fell into Mara's hair. She found the loose stone with trembling fingers. It moved. Behind it was darkness. Cold air touched her face. Mara nearly cried with relief. Come on. She gathered the pups. The first part of the tunnel was narrow. Mara crawled on her elbows. Her knees scraped stone. She dragged the wooden crate behind her. The pups cried whenever the tunnel shook. Mara kept moving. Behind her came a deep rumble. She looked back. The cellar ceiling was beginning to collapse. Keep going. She pulled the crate harder. A beam crashed through the floor above. Firelight flashed through the cracks. Mara crawled faster. Her palms bled. Smoke filled the tunnel. The white pup whimpered against her chest. Mara pressed her face against its head. You are not dying. Another crash. The ground shook. The tunnel roof shed stones. Mara covered the pups with her body. For several seconds there was nothing except darkness and the sound of falling rock. Then silence. Mara lifted her head. A faint blue light appeared ahead. Night. She crawled toward it. The opening emerged behind a wall of roots halfway up the hillside. Mara pushed through. Cold air struck her face. She dragged the crate into the open. Then she turned. Her cabin was burning. The roof collapsed inward. Flames rose. Into the night. Mara stood frozen. For years, that cabin had been the only place in the world that belonged entirely to her. Every table, every blanket, every dried herb, every little object left behind by the people she had lost. All of it disappeared beneath orange fire. Mara swallowed. She wanted to cry, but 9 tiny bodies were moving inside the crate. She had no time. She lifted the crate, and then she saw them. Riders, not villagers. Men wearing dark cloaks. They moved through the burning trees. One carried a torch, another held a sword. The symbol on his cloak was small, but Mara recognized it. Lord Varrek, the king's royal advisor. Mara had seen him only twice in her life. A polished man with cold eyes. A man who never smiled unless someone else was losing something. Why were his men here? She stepped backward. The wolves stirred. Mara pulled the crate behind a fallen tree. The riders passed below. One stopped. He looked toward the burning cabin. Nothing. Not yet. Keep searching. What if the pups escaped? The man beside him laughed. They can't survive this fire. Mara's blood went cold. Pups, they knew. She pressed her hand over her mouth. The riders continued. Only when their footsteps disappeared did Mara move. She carried the pups higher into the hills. An abandoned shepherd's shelter stood beneath a rock overhang. It had no door. The roof leaked, but it was hidden from the valley. Mara laid the pups inside. She used her remaining blanket as bedding. Then she went outside. Snow had begun falling. Tiny white flakes landed on her burned hands. She looked back at the valley. The entire forest seemed to be glowing. The fire was spreading toward the village. Mara sank against the stone wall. She had nothing. No cabin, almost no food, warm clothes, idea where to go. But when she heard a weak cry behind her, she stood. She went back inside. The white pup was breathing strangely, too slowly. Mara touched its nose, cold.
No.
She rubbed its tiny body. She warmed water. She crushed herbs. She held the pup beneath her cloak. Hours passed. The other pup slept. Mara did not. Near dawn, the white pup opened its eyes. Mara smiled through tears. There you are. The pup moved closer. Then Mara noticed the mark again, the silver crescent beneath its fur. She remembered her grandmother. The old woman had once told her that the Alpha King's wolves were not ordinary wolves. They know blood, her grandmother had whispered. They know truth. Mara had laughed at the time. Now she did not. A sound rolled across the mountains, a howl. Deep, powerful, the kind of sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The pups woke. Every one of them turned toward the same direction. Mara stepped outside. The howl came again. Far across the valley, on a ridge above the burning forest, stood an enormous white wolf. He was larger than any wolf Mara had ever seen. His coat shone beneath the fading moon. Around him stood armed riders wearing the royal crest. The wolf stared toward Mara's shelter. Then he lifted his head, and Mara felt something she could not explain, recognition. The great wolf disappeared behind the ridge. Moments later, a man emerged from the trees, tall, broad-shouldered. His black hair was damp with snow. His face was hard from years of command, but his eyes looked as though he had not slept in days. King Kaelen, the Alpha King. His guards followed. One of them pointed toward the burning valley. My king, the trail ends here. Kaelen did not answer. He crouched. His fingers touched the ash. Then he found something, a tiny pawprint. He followed it, another, then another, a torn piece of wool, a blood-stained blanket. Kaelen's face changed. They're alive. The guards stared. Your Majesty? Kaelen stood. They're alive. He moved uphill. Inside the shepherd's shelter, Mara heard footsteps. She pulled the pups behind her. The white pup crawled out. Mara caught it. Then the creature looked toward the entrance. A soft cry escaped its throat. Outside, Kaelen stopped. His breath caught. He knew that sound. For 3 days, he had heard nothing from his missing heirs. 3 days of blood trails. Empty dens, burned forests, dead ends. He had prepared himself for the worst. Now one tiny voice had answered him from inside a ruined shepherd's shelter. Kaelen pushed aside the hanging cloth. Mara stood there, smoke-stained, exhausted, holding a white pup against her chest. 9 wolf pups stared from the blankets behind her. Kaelen forgot how to breathe. He had found them. But he had also found the woman standing between them and the world, and she was looking at him as if he were the danger. Kaelen had been feared across the northern kingdom for a reason. His armies had never lost a major battle. His wolves controlled the mountain passes. Nobles lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Hunters stopped speaking when his name was mentioned. But none of that mattered in the shepherd's shelter, because the moment Kaelen saw the 9 pups alive, the king disappeared. What remained was a father. He took 1 step forward. Mara stepped back. The movement was small, but Kaelen noticed. His eyes dropped to the walking stick in her hand, then to the burns on her fingers, then to the blood on her sleeve, then to the pups. You found them. Mara said nothing. Kaelen looked at the white pup. The little animal was staring at him. Kaelen slowly lowered himself to 1 knee. He removed his gloves. His guards shifted uneasily. The king ignored them. He extended 1 hand, not toward the pup, toward the ground. He waited. The white pup moved first. It crawled across the blanket, then across the stone, then stopped beside Kaelen. Its tiny nose touched his fingers. Kaelen closed his eyes for a moment. The entire world seemed silent. The pup leaned against his hand. Kaelen's jaw tightened. He had thought them dead. All 9. His youngest heirs. The last surviving branch of the Moonfang line. He had imagined finding bones beneath the ashes. Instead, he had found them alive, because of a woman who had nothing. Mara watched him carefully. You are the king. Kaelen opened his eyes. Yes. She looked at his sword, then at the guards. Your men were searching my home. Kaelen's expression hardened. My men, the men who started the fire. They were not mine. Mara studied his face. Kaelen could see the uncertainty in her eyes. He did not blame her. Who are they? Varrek's. Kaelen went completely still. The name changed the air. You're certain? I saw their cloaks. Mara pointed toward the valley. They were looking for the pups. Kaelen stood. How long have you known they were being hunted? Since I found them. She showed him the wounds. Kaelen crouched beside the nearest pup. His expression became cold. These were blade wounds, binding marks, signs of capture. He knew immediately what it meant. Someone had tried to take the pups alive, and when they failed, they had burned the forest. Kaelen looked toward the valley. Smoke still rose from the trees. His voice became quiet. Varrek. One of his guards stepped forward. My king. Send riders to the eastern road. The guard hesitated. Should we return to the fortress? Kaelen looked at the pups. Not yet. Mara stared. You need to leave. Kaelen looked at her. You saved my family. I saved animals. They are my family. The words carried no anger, only truth. Mara looked down. The white pup had crawled back against her boot. Kaelen noticed. You have been feeding them. Mara nodded. With what? What I had. How much? Mara looked away. Enough. Kaelen understood. She had used her winter supplies. The food she needed. The medicine she needed. The shelter she had lost. All for 9 creatures she did not know. Something in him shifted. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Land, gold, protection, power. Mara wanted nothing. That frightened him more than greed ever had. The journey to the fortress could not begin immediately. Several pups were too weak. Mara refused to move them until they could survive the cold. Kaelen ordered blankets brought, food, watered, a litter. Mara accepted none of it without first checking whether the supplies were safe. The king watched. She smelled the milk, examined the meat, tested the water. One guard smiled. Kaelen did not. He understood why. Trust was not something Mara gave, because someone wore a crown. They traveled 2 days later. The road through the northern valley was scarred by fire. Blackened trees stood like broken fingers against the sky. Families gathered beside ruined homes. Children carried bundles of clothes. Old men searched through ashes. Kaelen stopped repeatedly. He spoke to villagers. He ordered food distributed. He opened royal wagons. Mara watched. The king did not merely ride past suffering. He saw a T1 ruined farm. An old woman refused to leave her burned house. Kaelen dismounted. He carried a broken wooden chest from the ashes himself. Mara watched from the wagon. Something changed inside her. The man she had feared was not the man she was beginning to see. Later, when the road narrowed beside a frozen stream, Mara told the royal trackers to stop. They looked at her. There is a washed-out bridge ahead. One tracker frowned. The map says otherwise. The map is wrong. Kaelen looked at her. How do you know? Mara pointed toward the trees. No birds. The king looked. She continued. The wind is carrying water from the ravine. The birds avoid the bridge because the ice broke beneath it. The trackers checked. She was right. They changed direction. Kaelen walked beside her. You know these woods. I know enough to stay alive. You saved 9 wolves. Mara glanced at him. I don't think they saved themselves. A faint smile touched Kaelen's face. It disappeared quickly, but Mara saw it. For the first time, she wondered what kind of man lived beneath the crown that night. The pups slept beside the fire. Mara sat near them. Kaelen stood outside the tent, watching the stars. You should sleep. Mara looked up. So should you. I am used to it. That's not the same thing. Kaelen looked at her. She lowered her eyes. Neither spoke again. The fortress appeared the following evening. Black stone, tall towers, silver banners. Mara had never seen anything so large. The gates opened. The royal court gathered. People cheered when they saw the pups. Mara remained behind. She did not like crowds. Inside the fortress, the pups were placed in a warm chamber. Mara stayed with them. Servants brought food. Healers arrived. The pups began recovering. For the first time since the fire, Mara allowed herself to breathe. Then she saw A guard standing near the doorway. Around his wrist was a strip of dark leather. The same symbol, the same crescent, the same 3 claw marks. Mara's heart stopped. The guard looked at her, only for a second. But it was enough. That night, Kaelen received a sealed message. He opened it. His face changed. The village council had accused Mara of starting the fire, and the evidence had already been prepared. The accusation moved through the fortress faster than fire through dry grass. By sunrise, Mara's name had become a whisper. By midday, it had become a certainty in the mouths of people who had never met her. She had started the fire. She had stolen the pups. She had planned everything. The evidence seemed convincing. A witness claimed he had seen Mara carrying oil near the forest. Another claimed she had argued with a hunter days before the fire. A burned piece of cloth had been found near the first flames. It belonged to Mara. She stood in the great hall while nobles watched her from both sides. Kaelen sat on the throne. Varrek stood beside him. Mara recognized him immediately. The royal advisor looked exactly as she remembered. Perfect clothes, calm eyes, and a smile without warmth. "My king," Varrek said, "the evidence is unfortunate but clear." Kaelen stared at him. Clear? She was found with the pups. She saved them. Or stole them. Mara looked at Varrek. "I found them starving." Varrek smiled. And conveniently, their mother was gone. Kaelen's hand tightened against the throne. Mara saw it. The king was angry, but he did not act. Not yet. Varrek continued. "The kingdom needs certainty." Kaelen stood. "The kingdom needs truth." Silence filled the hall. Mara was ordered to remain within the fortress while the investigation continued. She hated every moment, not because she feared punishment, because the pups were becoming restless. They would not eat properly when she left. They cried when strangers approached. The white pup followed her everywhere. One evening, Mara sat beside the youngest. The pup placed its head on her lap. "You shouldn't trust me this much." Its ears twitched. Mara smiled sadly. "You don't know what people say about me." The pup licked her hand. She laughed softly. Then the laugh disappeared. Something was wrong. The water bowls. She smelled them. A strange bitter scent. Mara knocked one over. The water spilled across the floor. She grabbed the others. One pup had already drunk. It staggered. Mara caught it. "No." The pup collapsed. Mara shouted for the healer. Servants ran. Kaelen arrived moments later. The little body was limp in Mara's arms. She refused to surrender it. The healer examined the pup. "Poison." Kaelen's face became terrifyingly still. Mara carried the pup to the fire. She remembered an herb from the forest, a bitter root. She crushed it, mixed it with water. The healer objected. Mara ignored him. She held the pup's mouth open. A drop, another. The animal twitched. Kaelen knelt beside her. "Will it live?" "I don't know." Mara's voice broke. It was the first time Kaelen had heard fear in it. Hours passed. The pup did not move. Mara held it against her chest. Kaelen remained nearby. The king could command armies. He could open gates. He could sentence men. But he could not force a dying creature to breathe. Near dawn, the pup moved. Mara gasped. Its tiny paw pressed against her hand. Kaelen closed his eyes. Relief moved across his face. Mara looked at him for a moment. They understood each other without speaking. Someone inside the fortress wanted the pups dead, and whoever that person was had access to the royal chambers. The investigation changed. Kaelen trusted fewer people. Mara trusted no one. Then she noticed the leather bands again. The marks were not identical. Each carried a different symbol. She laid them beside one another. A pattern appeared. The symbols formed a line. Mara stared. "Kaelen." The king looked over. She pointed. "It's a map." Kaelen moved closer. The symbols corresponded to old mountain markings, a hidden route, a chamber, an ancient place beneath the northern mountain. "The Moonfang Sanctuary," Kaelen whispered. Mara looked at him. "You know it." "Only from stories." He studied the map. "Varrek knows about it too." The answer was immediate. The pups were not merely targets. They were keys. Whatever existed beneath the mountain could threaten Varrek's plan. They left that night. Only a few guards accompanied them. The mountain swallowed them before dawn. Inside the ancient passage, old carvings appeared along the walls. Wolves, kings, fields, people kneeling beside animals, then famine. The carvings showed wolves protecting starving villagers. At the end stood a sealed stone door. The silver crescent was carved into its center. Kaelen touched it. The door opened. Beyond it was a chamber untouched for centuries. Ancient records rested inside stone cases. Point 1 described the Moonfang Oath, another described the bloodline, and another revealed the truth. The Moonfang wolves did not obey a king because of fear. They recognized the ruler only when the ruler protected the helpless. Kaelen stared at the words. Mara stared at the pups. Then came a sound. Stone breaking. Men shouting. Kaelen turned. The entrance exploded inward. Barracks. Soldiers poured into the chamber. Take the pups. Kaelen drew his sword. Mara grabbed the crate. The guards charged. Steel struck stone. Kaelen fought at the doorway. Go. Mara ran. A blast shook the passage. The ceiling cracked. She turned. Kaelen disappeared behind falling stone. Kaelen. No answer. The passage collapsed completely. Mara stood alone. 9 pups around her. An ancient secret beneath the mountain, and no way back. For several seconds, Mara could hear nothing. Then came the pups' 9 frightened whimpers. Mara turned. The narrow passage stretched into darkness. Behind her, the stones blocked the way back to Kaelen. She placed both hands against the wall. Please. Nothing moved. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Mara closed her eyes. She wanted to panic. She wanted to sit down. She wanted someone stronger to come and tell her what to do. But 9 tiny lives depended on her. She picked up the crate and walked. The passage descended. The air became colder, then warmer. Mara heard water. She followed the sound. A river flowed beneath the mountain, black water moving silently through stone. Ancient markings appeared beside it. Moon-shaped symbols, wolf footprints carved into rock. Mara followed them. The white pup was weak again. She stopped. The others were restless. They needed to keep moving. But the white pup could barely breathe. Mara sat beside the river. She wrapped it in her cloak. We stay. The words were quiet, but we stay. She warmed water. She mixed herbs. She waited. Hours passed. The pup survived, and Mara finally saw the sanctuary. It was enormous, a cavern hidden beneath the mountain. Minerals glowed faintly along the walls. An underground spring ran through its center. Old stone pillars rose from the ground. At the far end stood a statue, a man beside a wolf. Not master and servant, companions. Mara approached. An inscription covered the base. She read slowly. The first Alpha King had written that power was not measured by how many obeyed you. It was measured by how many weaker creatures felt safe in your presence. Mara touched the stone. She understood. The kingdom had forgotten. Maybe that was why it was burning. Above them, Kaelen survived the collapse. He climbed through the broken passage with blood on his forehead. 2 loyal guards followed. The others had betrayed him. He found the direction Mara had taken. Then he saw the pieces of her cloak. He followed. Meanwhile, Varrek returned to the fortress. He announced that Kaelen had been killed. By nightfall, the kingdom believed it. The royal banners were lowered. The gates closed. Varrek took control. He promised food, protection, order. But the granaries were already empty. He had secretly moved the grain weeks before. Villagers who had survived the fire began realizing the truth. The disaster had never been about protecting them. It had been about power. Inside the mountain sanctuary, Mara sat beside the pups. She had not slept. Her head dropped against the stone wall. Her eyes closed. Then she heard footsteps. She opened them. A figure stood at the entrance, bloodied, exhausted, alive. Kaelen. Mara stared. Neither moved. Then the white pup stood. It took 3 uncertain steps. Kaelen knelt. The pup walked toward him. Mara covered her mouth. Kaelen touched its head. Then he looked at her. You stayed. Mara's eyes filled with tears. So did you. He smiled. Barely, but it was real. They studied the ancient oath together. Kaelen understood what he had to do. Varrek could not claim the throne if the Moonfang bloodline rejected him publicly, but they needed proof, the records, the witnesses. The truth, they returned through the hidden mountain passage. The kingdom had changed. Varrek had gathered the nobles and villagers in the central square. He stood on a raised platform. He announced that Kaelen was dead, that Mara had betrayed the kingdom, that the pups had been stolen. Then the crowd heard footsteps. Everyone turned. Mara entered the square. The white pup rested against her chest. 8 others followed. Behind them came Kaelen, alive, wearing his royal armor. The crowd erupted. Varrek's face went pale, but only for a moment. Then he smiled. One witness remains. A man stepped forward. Mara recognized him. He had been outside her cabin the night of the fire. The man pointed at her. She started it. Silence fell. Mara looked at him, and the truth finally came to the surface. The witness could not meet Mara's eyes. His hands trembled. Varrek noticed. Speak. The man swallowed. Mara stepped forward. You were there. The crowd became silent. You were outside my cabin. The man looked at her, his eyes filled with shame. Varrek's voice sharpened. Answer her. The witness closed his eyes. Then he fell to his knees. I lied. A wave of whispers passed through the square. Varrek stepped backward. The witness continued. They told us to burn the forest. Kaelen's face hardened. Who? The man pointed toward Varrek. The advisor stood frozen. They wanted the pups. The witness explained everything. The fire had been started in several places. The hunters had driven the wolf pack away. The mother had been killed. The pups had escaped. When Mara found them, Varrek's men followed. The cabin was burned to destroy evidence. The witness had been ordered to accuse Mara. Then another man stepped forward, a royal guard. The same guard Mara had noticed in the fortress. He removed the leather band from his wrist. The symbol was identical. Varrek finally understood. The room was gone. The kingdom had turned against him. Villagers began shouting. Families who had lost homes stared at him with hatred. They realized their suffering had been part of his plan. Varrek reached for his sword. Kaelen did not draw his own. Do not. Varrek laughed bitterly. You think mercy makes you strong? Kaelen looked at him. No. He glanced at Mara, then at the 9 young wolves. Mercy reminds us what strength is for. Varrek was arrested. Kaelen refused to execute him. Instead, the ancient royal law was invoked. A public trial, witnesses, evidence, records from the sanctuary. The truth was finally allowed to speak. Varrek lost his title. His lands were taken. The stolen grain was returned. The conspirators were imprisoned. The villagers were given royal supplies to rebuild. The northern forest was placed under protection. And the old law concerning wolves was changed. An hunter could kill a wolf simply because it lived near human land. Proof of danger would be required. For the first time in generations, the kingdom's wolves were no longer treated as enemies by default. Months passed. The valley slowly healed. New roofs appeared. Fields were replanted. Children played near the forest again. Mara's cabin was gone. Kaelen offered her rooms in the fortress. She refused. He offered her the sanctuary. She refused that too. I belong near the forest. So Kaelen built her a new home there. Not a palace, a cabin. Stone foundation, wooden walls, wide windows, a strong roof, and beneath it, a cellar, a warm cellar. Blankets covered the floor. Food was stored in wooden boxes. Dried herbs hung from the walls, and pawprints covered the stone. The 9 pups grew. The white one remained closest to Mar. It slept outside her door. The others wandered between the forest and the royal lands. They became strong, beautiful, wild, but they always returned. One winter morning, Mara stood outside her cabin. Snow covered the trees. Her breath formed pale clouds. The 9 young wolves raced through the snow. The white one reached her first. It pressed its head against her hand. Mara laughed. Behind her came footsteps. Kaelen, and guards, and crown. Just a dark coat and snow in his hair. He stopped beside her for a while. Neither spoke. The wolves moved around them. The forest was quiet, safe, alive. Kaelen looked toward the cabin. You built a cellar. Mara smiled. I learned my lesson. He laughed softly. It was a sound she had heard only a handful of times. She looked at him. You should visit more often. I intend to. The words were simple, but they carried something neither of them needed to name yet. Trust had grown slowly, like a tree, like a forest, like a home. Mara looked toward the 9 wolves. Once, she had hidden them beneath a burning cabin because she believed they were helpless. She had thought she was saving them. But perhaps they had saved her too. They had given her a reason to open her heart again. They had led a king to her door. They had exposed a traitor. They had changed the laws of a kingdom. And they had turned a lonely woman into something she had forgotten she could become. Family. The snow continued falling. The wolves disappeared between the trees. Then the white one turned back. Mara watched it. Kaelen stood beside her. Neither followed. They simply watched, because some things did not need to be chased. Some things came back when they knew they were loved. Years later, people would still tell the story of the great fire in the Black Pine Forest. They would talk about the king who survived. Betrayal. The wolves who carried the Moonfang blood. The advisor who tried to steal a kingdom. But Mara remembered something different. She remembered 9 tiny bodies trembling beneath the earth. She remembered smoke filling her home. She remembered being afraid. And she remembered choosing to stay. That was the part she never forgot. Because courage had not arrived in her like thunder. It had not made her fearless. It had simply placed 9 helpless lives in front of her and whispered one question: what will you do? Mara had answered with her whole life. She would protect them. And in the end, the kingdom learned the same lesson. A kingdom was not made strong by the walls around its castles, not by the size of its armies, not by the fear in the eyes of its enemies. It became strong when the smallest creature could find shelter beneath its roof, when the wounded were allowed to heal, when the truth could survive a lie, when power chose mercy. And when someone with nothing left to lose still found the courage to save another life. The old cellar beneath Mara's new cabin remained warm through every winter. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, the 9 wolves slept there, their bodies curled together, their breathing slow, their paws leaving soft marks across the stone, and whenever Mara looked at them, she remembered the night everything burned, the night she lost her home, the night she thought she had nothing left, the night a king followed smoke through a dying forest, and the night 9 starving pups became the beginning of a family. Outside, the Black Pine Forest stood beneath the moon. Silver light touched the branches. Far away, wolves howled from the mountains. One voice answered. Then another. Then 9. Mara stood in the doorway listening. Kaelen stood beside her. Neither spoke. They did not need to. The forest was alive again. The kingdom was healing. The pups were safe. And beneath the warm roof of a little cabin at the edge of the wilderness, the woman who had once hidden 9 starving lives from the flames finally understood something she had spent years forgetting. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can become the beginning of an entire new world.